In 1992, a skull fragment unearthed in a serene wooded area of Baldwin, Pennsylvania, was identified as belonging to Michael Rosenblum, who had last been seen on February 14, 1980, departing from a nearby gas station. While this revelation brought closure to the mystery surrounding his disappearance, the circumstances of his death remained elusive. This ambiguity perpetuated the unsettling claims made by his father over the years, suggesting that local law enforcement not only contributed to his demise, but also engaged in a deliberate cover-up of their involvement. Michael Rosenblum, born in 1954, was the cherished only son of Barbara and Morris Rosenblum, hailing from the elegant, Shadyside neighborhood of Pittsburgh, where he spent his formative years. As he entered his late teens, he succumbed to the allure of drugs and alcohol, which spiraled into legal troubles and a growing apprehension towards the police. He often evaded capture, once instigating a dramatic car chase, and at times resorted to violent resistance during arrests. Between 1974 and 1980, the Pittsburgh police apprehended him thrice for traffic offenses, including driving under the influence and drug possession, prompting Morris to confiscate his son's prized Datsun 240Z. In a bid to assist Michael in overcoming his struggles, the Rosenblum family took decisive action. Maurice pinpointed the onset of his son's troubles to a doctor near their summer retreat in Beach Haven, who had irresponsibly prescribed a multitude of drugs, including Percodan, Valium, and Tusionex. Following Morris's stern warning to New Jersey Governor Brendan Byrne about exposing the situation to the New York Times, the New Jersey Attorney General's office initiated an investigation, leading the doctor to relinquish his medical license to evade criminal prosecution. Michael sought solace in various rehabilitation facilities, including the esteemed Western Psychiatric Institute. During a 28-day program between 1979 and 1980, he crossed paths with Lisa Sherer, a 30-year-old former Playboy bunny from Baldwin, who also bore a history of legal entanglements in her hometown. Michael, known among his friends for his effortless allure and sharp intellect, found himself in a romantic entanglement with Sherer, who was then separated from her second husband shortly after their release. His father noted that Michael's eagerness to embrace a lavish lifestyle had led him to abandon his college education prematurely. Consequently, Maurice secured him a position at his insurance brokerage, emphasizing that to truly enjoy life and drive a 240Z, hard work was essential. Upon his retirement in 2014, Alexander Bennett, the mayor of Baldwin and a lifelong resident, reminisced about the warmth and safety that characterized the community in the mid-20th century. "We were blissfully unaware of what a house key was," he reflected. "From the moment you purchased your car, the key remained in it until you sold it." By early 1980, Aldo Gaburi had served as the chief of the Baldwin Police for the last 6 years of his 37-year tenure. He owned 4 properties within the borough and a sprawling 207-acre estate in rural Gilmore Township, situated near the West Virginia border. His rapport with Mayor Samuel McPherson was notably close, with reports suggesting that Gaburi would dismiss traffic violations at the mayor's behest and even conceal a traffic incident involving McPherson's son. Opinions among the department's 22 officers regarding Gaburi were sharply divided. Detractors labeled him as corrupt and inept, accusing him of evading accountability while prioritizing job security. "Crossing from Pittsburgh into Baldwin," one sergeant remarked to Pittsburgh Magazine in 1988, "means leaving the genuine realm of law enforcement behind." Michael completed his program at Western on January 10, 1980, and returned to his parents' home. Later in the month, he received a speeding ticket in Pittsburgh and opted to hire a lawyer to handle the matter. On February 13th, Barbara Rosenblum, suspecting her son was under the influence of drugs again, searched his room and discovered a container of pills. This led to a heated argument, during which she insisted he leave the house. Michael departed and visited Sherer, taking her to a local nightclub to assist her in applying for a waitressing position. They then returned to her adoptive mother's residence in Whitehall, located southeast of the city. The following morning, he experienced lingering effects from the previous night's drug use, prompting Sherer to take him to a nearby hospital around 10 a.m. She urged him to admit himself, as his eyes were frequently rolling back in his head. However, Michael firmly declined, and although hospital staff noted he did not appear impaired at that moment, they strongly recommended he check in. He ultimately ended the discussion by leaving the hospital. The couple, accompanied by Scherer's 3-year-old daughter, departed in Scherer's Pontiac Sunbird, heading north on Pennsylvania Route 885 to return to the Rosenblum home. Michael also had a scheduled meeting at 12:30 p.m. in downtown Pittsburgh with the attorney he had retained for the speeding ticket. After Sherer accidentally drove over a curb while turning into Homestead, she stopped at a gas station on Main Street in West Homestead to check for a possible flat tire. Michael exited the vehicle, visibly upset by her driving. Their argument escalated to the point where the gas station owner felt compelled to call the police. Subsequently, Michael took control of the vehicle, moving to the driver's seat. However, in doing so, he backed the car into a guy wire of a telephone pole. Before Sherer could continue their dispute, he instructed her and her daughter to exit the vehicle. They did not attempt to re-enter the Sunbird. Michael instructed them to convene at his mother's residence. However, they opted to hitchhike back to Oakland, where Sherer rechecked herself into Western. Michael departed at precisely 11:35 a.m., and thereafter, no confirmed sightings of him alive were reported. Within an hour, Scherer's Sunbird was discovered abandoned in the westbound lane of East Carson Street, a segment of Pennsylvania Route 837, nestled between two sets of railroad tracks along the serene south bank of the Monongahela River, just below a wooded bluff in a sparsely populated area of Baldwin, a quarter-mile west of the Glenwood Bridge. At 12:24 p.m., 2 borough police officers, Chester Lombardi and Robert Weber, arrived at the scene. Upon inspection, Lombardi and Weber observed that the vehicle's engine was cold and the keys were absent. Both left-side tires were irreparably shredded, indicating that the vehicle had been driven on its rims after the tires were damaged, as the rims themselves bore significant damage. The interior of the car was cluttered with various items, including hundreds of photographs, to the point that Weber abandoned his search for its contents shortly after beginning. He radioed the car's license plate number, leading to the identification of Sherer as the owner. Subsequently, he requested a tow. While waiting, another Baldwin officer, Sergeant Thomas Morse, passed by and inquired about their activities. The tow truck arrived shortly thereafter, transporting the Sunbird to a nearby garage where the Baldwin police stored impounded vehicles. The following day, Sherer contacted Barbara Rosenblum, informing her that Michael had not returned. As far as she was aware, he still possessed the Sunbird. While Morris held on to the belief that Michael would return or call within a day or two, Barbara was immediately struck by concern, noting that it was highly unusual for him not to communicate his plans in advance. She promptly contacted the Pittsburgh police to report him missing. Captain Teresa Rocco, who leads the missing persons unit, promptly initiated a search, prioritizing the recovery of the Sunbird. She would later contact law enforcement agencies across every state and major city. Meanwhile, Maurice took matters into his own hands, reaching out to his son's old friends as far as California to check if Michael had traveled there. He offered a reward for any information and dedicated time away from his business to distribute flyers. The search for the vehicle concluded in late May, when the owner of the shop where it had been parked applied for a salvage permit. Upon discovering that the car had been reported stolen, he alerted the police. Morse contacted Sherer, who then informed Rocco. Together with 2 city detectives and Maurice Rosenblum, she went to see Gaburi. Records from Baldwin police indicated that the Sunbird had been at the location since the day Michael vanished. Rocco pressed for an explanation as to why Sherer had not been informed, despite the car being traced back to her. Gaburi claimed he had only learned of the car's presence that day, but mentioned that his department had sent a letter to Sherer the following day, which he suggested might have been lost in a mailbox fire. A week later, they retrieved a letter addressed to Sherer dated February 15th. She insisted she had never received it. The police record of the car's towing included a note that read, "Gallagher notified Ant," referring to Patrick Gallagher, the dispatcher on duty that day. The handwriting was later identified as Gaburi's, and notably, Sherer did not have an aunt. In late June, the Pittsburgh Press published a story about the case, detailing the troubled histories of both Michael Rosenblum and Sherer, accompanied by a photograph of Sherer. She later testified in a deposition that the photo had been taken from one of the albums in her car, which was not present when the vehicle was returned to her. Heckman, the journalist behind the article, later revealed that she obtained most of the story's details, including the photograph, from Gaburi. An internal memo indicated that Baldwin officer Warren Cooley also provided her with additional insights. Both he and the police chief later testified that they were unaware of Scherer's Sunbird being in the police impound lot, let alone having visited it during the 3 months it was stored there. The next day, Gaburi initiated a search of the area where the vehicle had been discovered on River Road back in February. Search teams, primarily composed of volunteers from the borough's fire department and county police, spent 3 hours combing a small section between the road and the river. They were aided by scuba divers hired by Maurice Rosenblum to explore the river, as well as a helicopter lent to Maurice by a client for aerial surveillance. Among the Baldwin police officers present that day was Skippy Dobson, who also served as a firefighter. Dobson had been on dispatch duty when Michael Rosenblum went missing. He recounted that he and other searchers repeatedly requested permission to extend their search either downstream or into the wooded area known as the 40 acres, now referred to as Hayes Woods, on the south side of the road. Gaburi denied their requests, insisting that Maurice Rosenblum only wanted the smaller area to be searched. A week later, Gaburi contacted Rocco with news that initially led her to believe the search for Michael might be concluding. Witnesses from a robbery at a Baldwin drugstore had identified Michael as the suspect, a claim Gaburi found hard to believe. Records indicated that Baldwin officer Warren Cooley had produced a facial composite of the suspect the day after the robbery. This image bore a striking resemblance to the one of Michael Rosenblum featured on the numerous flyers his father had distributed and posted throughout the Pittsburgh area. There was no indication on the composite sketch regarding its creation date or the artist's identity. Witnesses had described the robber as wearing oversized mirrored sunglasses, yet the sketch failed to capture this detail. Rocco and Maurice Rosenblum visited the drugstore to show the witnesses photos of Michael, but they did not recognize him. They also discovered that Cooley had not interviewed a witness who had seen the getaway vehicle. After learning about Rocco and Rosenblum's inquiries, Cooley returned to speak with both witnesses again, this time armed with a complete set of mug shots, but he only showed one of them a picture of Michael. In mid-July, Heckman contacted Barbara Rosenblum to inform her that the Baldwin police were preparing to issue an arrest warrant for Michael in connection with the robbery, and she would be writing a story about it. She spoke with Rocco, who then reached out to Gaburi, while Maurice Rosenblum contacted the press. Ultimately, the story was scrapped, and the warrant was rescinded, a decision Gaburi later attributed to his respect for the Rosenblums. Rocco managed to identify a suspect who matched the description more closely and had a similar vehicle located in the Butler jail north of Pittsburgh. This individual eventually confessed to the crime. Subsequent records revealed that the Baldwin police had not pursued any further investigation into the robbery from April to July. After July, no new leads surfaced. These developments led Maurice Rosenblum to believe that the Baldwin police were withholding information about events that transpired between February and May. He decided to increase the reward amount and purchased billboard space near where the Sunbird was discovered. For the next 2 years, Maurice largely set aside his business to concentrate on the search. He occasionally traveled across the country on short notice to chase leads as far away as California. He consulted with mediums and psychics and obtained permission to place a trap on Scherer's phone. On the subsequent 2 anniversaries of Michael's disappearance, Maurice received mysterious phone calls at home. Each caller claimed that Michael had been apprehended by the Baldwin police, but they abruptly hung up without revealing their identities. To gather more information, Maurice placed classified ads in local newspapers, urging anyone with knowledge to report it to the authorities and claim the reward, but no one ever came forward. In the 7 years that followed Michael's disappearance and the Baldwin police's investigation, 3 officers involved in the case passed away from heart attacks. Lombardi, who had responded to the abandoned vehicle, Patrick Gallagher, the dispatcher who had informed Scherer's non-existent aunt the day after that the car had been towed, and Morse. Morse, a bodybuilder known as Thumper and regarded by his colleagues as the departmental enforcer, had reportedly attempted suicide twice before his death. Meanwhile, Sherer finalized her divorce and entered into a 3rd marriage. A few years later, she and her husband, along with their daughter, left the Pittsburgh area due to a bomb threat. Her family lost track of her, stating she was off the map, possibly having returned to her previous home in Florida or moved to Baltimore. Investigators hired by Rosenblum were unable to locate her. Maurice Rosenblum advocated for higher-level law enforcement agencies to investigate both his son's disappearance, which he had come to believe was a death, and the Baldwin police's handling of the case. Eventually, he succeeded in prompting the county police to initiate an investigation. However, after some initial efforts, they misplaced their files. "I distinctly remembered feeling embarrassed by the whole situation," one detective recalled. Next, the community advocate section of the state attorney general's office took over. Rosenblum later characterized their approach as a tap dance, noting that their investigators failed to interview most of the officers and employees from the Baldwin Police Department. They had a conversation with Chief Gallovich, who was quoted as saying that Rosenblum appeared to be looking for a fall guy. "I don't know what his problem is, and I don't care." In December 1986, the Rosenblums received another anonymous tip that provided information supporting Maurice's belief that the Baldwin police were actively hindering the investigation into their son's disappearance. A letter signed by a concerned friend arrived at their home, revealing this information and suggesting they speak with Margaret Hazlitt, a former state trooper who had served as a dispatcher for the Baldwin police after her retirement. Maurice promptly drove to Lakeville, Massachusetts, where she had relocated, to discuss with her. Hazlitt recounted that on the day the Sunbird was discovered in Baldwin's impound lot, Gallovich was furious. She was at work and witnessed the chief instructing Fred Capelli, the department's clerk, to draft a letter to Sherer stating that her car had been recovered, backdating it to February 15th, and placing it in the file to make it appear as if it had been sent. She had refrained from informing the other investigations out of fear that she and Capelli would lose their jobs, and because they had never inquired about the letter. Upon returning to Pittsburgh, Maurice reached out to a longtime friend, State Representative K. Leroy Irvis, who was the Speaker of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, and shared his findings. Together, they brought the matter to State Attorney General Leroy Zimmerman, who then referred it to the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, an agency regarded as free from political interference. They interviewed Capelli, who not only corroborated Hazlitt's story, but also revealed that Gallovich had instructed him to forge Lombardi's signature on the letter after Lombardi had declined to sign it. Maurice later reflected that the investigation initially seemed to be gaining momentum. An investigator initially expressed his belief that Gaburi had been dishonest. As the situation unfolded, it appeared that there were additional criminal activities linked to the Baldwin police, and a grand jury was set to hear testimonies. However, the narrative shifted when the investigator suggested to Morris that it might be wiser to let Gaburi retire instead of facing potential charges. Later that year, the Attorney General's office unexpectedly dropped the case without providing any explanation. In July 1987, while the state investigation was still ongoing, Morris reached out to Baldwin's borough council, detailing his knowledge and suspicions regarding Gaburi's involvement in his son's disappearance and probable death. He specifically urged them to inquire with Capelli about Hazlitt's claims. Maurice informed the Post-Gazette that he had no interest in pursuing legal action or criminal charges. He even offered to personally fund Gaburi's retirement if he disclosed the truth to the council. Councilman Ken Guerra, who chaired the Public Safety Committee and served as the borough's volunteer fire chief, having been involved in the 1980 search, read Maurice's letter and convinced the council to initiate an investigation. He approached Capelli, who corroborated Hazlitt's allegations. Guerra was skeptical that Capelli would falsely accuse Gaburi, as he was known to be easily influenced and not the type to instigate such claims. Guerra then requested the village solicitor, John Luke, a law partner of Mayor McPherson and a close ally of Gaburi, to conduct an independent investigation. Consequently, the council engaged the law firm of Robert J. Sindrich, a former U.S. attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania. Both parties began collecting evidence in preparation for a hearing before the council. Luke conducted depositions with Capelli, who admitted to all the accusations against him but denied any involvement by Gaburi. He also spoke with George Gallovich, another Baldwin officer suspected of having written the letter to the Rosenblums. Private investigator Stephen Turksack, a distinguished retiree from the Pittsburgh police force who had previously collaborated with Rocco during the 1980 investigation, was engaged by the council upon Sindrich's recommendation. Given his historical involvement, Turksack felt a profound personal connection to the case. He directed his attention towards two officers still serving in Baldwin, Warren Cooley and Donald Missinick. Turksack became convinced that Michael Rosenblum had, as he had on prior occasions, evaded police attempts to apprehend him, potentially leading to a scenario where the officers might have forcibly run the Sunbird off the road. It was believed that Michael may have resisted arrest, resulting in a fatal confrontation with the officers, who then concealed the body. At a council hearing at the close of September, Sindrich presented witnesses who testified under oath, while Luke conducted cross-examinations. The proceedings were confined to the allegation that Gaburi had instructed Capelli not only to draft a backdated letter, but also to forge Lombardi's signature. Hazlitt reiterated her testimony, while Capelli's account diverged from his earlier deposition, reverting to his original statement to Guerra, claiming he acted solely under the chief's orders. Gallovich, maintaining his previous stance, denied authorship of the letter to the Rosenblums. However, during his deposition, he disclosed to Luke instances of corruption within the department, naming several officers he alleged were involved in an illicit gambling ring and providing intricate details about its operations. He further implicated Cooley in accepting bribes to dismiss traffic violations and extorting payments. Ultimately, a majority of the council concluded that the evidence against Gaburi was compelling, voting 5-2 to terminate his employment in early October, notifying him via letter that they believed his conduct had obstructed the search for Michael Rosenblum. Gaburi subsequently filed an appeal with the borough's Civil Service Commission, which included 3 members who were personal acquaintances. After the year, the commission decided to reverse the termination and reinstate Gaburi. Upon reviewing the allegations against the chief, it deemed Hazlitt's testimony to be mere hearsay and highlighted inconsistencies between Capelli's deposition and his statements during the hearing. The commission's secretary made disparaging comments regarding Rocco's investigative efforts, quipping that she couldn't find a lost dog. Capelli faced dismissal from the police department for admitting to document falsification. The sole officer to encounter any disciplinary action related to the events of 1980 was Robert Weber, Lombardi's partner, who had discovered Scherer's abandoned vehicle that day. He received a reprimand. In September 1987, Luke provided Gaburi with a copy of Gallovich's deposition following the officer's testimony. Once the chief reviewed it, he summoned Gallovich to his office and ominously warned him that his days were numbered. In April 1988, a producer from Unsolved Mysteries reached out to Gallovich regarding a potential segment on the Rosenblum case. As he was unavailable, she left a message on the answering machine of his roommate, a fellow officer loyal to Gaburi. The producer reported that her call was returned shortly thereafter by an individual claiming to be Gallovich, who attempted to dissuade her and the show from pursuing the segment. Gallovich was later cleared of making the call, suspecting his roommate instead. Shortly after this incident, Gallovich was suspended for allegedly misleading Luke during his deposition by claiming ignorance of Haslett's involvement in the case. Initially, he stated he did not know how Haslett arrived in the Pittsburgh area, only to later confess that he had indeed picked her up at the airport for the hearing. Additionally, a concurrent 60-day suspension was imposed for an unrelated matter concerning Gallovich's failure to follow up on a report of stolen checks assigned to him. In April, the Borough Council officially terminated his employment. In the aftermath of the Civil Service Commission upholding his termination, Gallovich pursued legal action and was reinstated in 1992, accompanied by a significant financial settlement. The narrative surrounding this case gained considerable traction in the late 1980s, particularly through an extensive feature in Pittsburgh Magazine and a segment on the nationally broadcast Unsolved Mysteries television program. These exposures significantly broadened public awareness of the case, provoking a negative response from the Baldwin Police Department. Pittsburgh Magazine dedicated its May 1988 issue to a cover story and editorial that meticulously chronicled the events leading up to Gaburi's reinstatement. Authors Terskak and Dobson shared insights with journalist James Harger regarding their suspicions of Cooley and Misenick's involvement. Dobson, who was on dispatch duty on February 14, 1980, noted that alongside Morse, Lombardi, and Weber, who were confirmed to be on River Road at midday, his radio logs indicated that Cooley and Misenick were likely present as well. At 11:53 a.m., they reported leaving a magistrate's office on Pittsburgh's south side, situated 5 miles northwest along the river from the location where the Sunbird was discovered, en route to serve a warrant in McKeesport, located 15 miles southeast along the Monongahela. Dobson pointed out that the only route to their destination was via Route 837, River Road, stating, "Nobody said anything, but they drove right past where that car was sitting." He further discovered that records from McKeesport indicated Cooley and Misenick had never executed the warrant, with no radioactivity logged for them until 2:30 p.m. "So where the hell were they at?" he questioned. Terskak noted that other officers from Baldwin shared his belief in the plausibility of the scenario he had constructed during the investigation, as Cooley had a reputation for being aggressive. At that time, Cooley was also facing a civil lawsuit from 2 residents who accused him of attempting to extort money, leading him to decline an interview with Pittsburgh Magazine on the advice of his legal counsel. Misenick, who had been noted by Terksak for his reaction of, "Is that right?" upon learning that his colleagues suspected him of sharing culpability in Michael Rosenblum's demise, conveyed to the magazine that he bore no responsibility for Dobson's comments and nothing further. Following the publication of the article, Cooley and Misenick initiated a libel lawsuit against the magazine's publisher, Harger, along with Gallovich and Tertsak. They contended that the article was rife with inaccuracies and carelessly implicated them in Rosenblum's mysterious disappearance, asserting that Harger had personally defamed them during a radio interview regarding the matter. The magazine staunchly defended its narrative, with Harger dismissing the claims as ludicrous. In 1990, on the very day the trial was set to commence, Cooley and Messinic reached a settlement estimated between $50,000 and $75,000. A year after his retirement in September 1988, Gaburi also filed a lawsuit against the magazine and Harger, although he soon withdrew Maurice Rosenblum as a defendant, contemplating his potential role as a witness. At the time of Cooley and Missinik's settlement, Gaburi's case remained unresolved. Meanwhile, NBC proceeded with the filming of its segment, which featured interviews with Morris and Barbara Rosenblum, Turksack, Haslett, Capelli, and Thomas McFall from the borough's Civil Service Commission, alongside reenactments of pivotal events, including the discovery of the Sunbird along River Road. The Pittsburgh police offered limited assistance due to the impending Pittsburgh Marathon, while the sheriff's office managed traffic control on River Road. However, the Baldwin police declined to cooperate, with Gaburi instructing his officers to refrain from providing traffic control or security, and to avoid interviews with the film crew. The segment ultimately aired in January 1989. Following the conclusion of the program, an unidentified man contacted the hotline from an undisclosed location in Washington state. He claimed to have been detained in the Baldwin police lockup on the night Michael Rosenblum went missing, having been arrested earlier that day for driving under the influence. He remembered that Michael was also in custody, suffering from a gunshot wound to his leg and other injuries indicative of a beating. Subsequently, officers arrived and took him away, presumably to a hospital. Morris Rosenblum, who had increased the reward to $25,000 and had come to believe his son was deceased, expressed to the media his intention to track down the caller. However, Baldwin police stated that there were no detainees in the lockup that day and maintained they had no information regarding Michael's location. In April 1988, a bone fragment and some clothing scraps were discovered in the woods along the Monongahela River, near the site where the Sunbird had been found 8 years prior. Initially thought to be human remains, the bones were later confirmed to belong to an animal. The corduroy and shoe soles found alongside them matched the attire Michael was wearing when Sherer last saw him drive away. Consequently, in late 1989, Morris Rosenblum submitted a petition to have his son declared legally dead. "If he were alive, I would have expected to hear from him," he stated in court. The petition was approved in early 1990, nearly a decade after Michael's disappearance. 2 years later, in April 1992, a hiker exploring the woods further down the Monongahela, in an area previously overlooked by searchers due to Gaburi's interference, stumbled upon a fragment of a human skull. By June, the county coroner's office confirmed it belonged to Michael Rosenblum, matching the unique sinus print from X-rays taken during his life. Maurice observed that the discovery coincided with the day he received the headstone he had ordered for a grave that was meant to remain unoccupied. He mentioned that a psychic he had consulted in the past, who had never visited Pittsburgh, had created a map pinpointing the location of Michael's body close to where the skull was uncovered. Although the cause of Michael's death remained undetermined, the family pledged to keep searching for answers. "I've known the truth for many years," Maurice remarked. "Who can say where this will lead us next?" Reina Angelica Marroquin, a Salvadoran woman, met a tragic end in the United States in 1969. Her murder remained shrouded in mystery until 1999, when her remains were discovered in the former residence of Howard B. Elkins, a notable businessman who emerged as the primary suspect. Following a police interview, Elkins took his own life in the back seat of a Ford Explorer at a friend's residence in Boca Raton, Florida. On September 2nd, 1999, authorities unearthed a 55-gallon drum in the crawl space of a house in Jericho, New York, a suburb of New York City. Inside, they found the mummified remains of a pregnant Hispanic woman in her late 20s, standing between 4 feet 9 inches and 5 feet 0 inches tall, distinguished by her unusual dental work. The forensic investigation revealed that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. The drum also contained an array of peculiar items, including polystyrene pellets, 2 rings, one engraved with MHR, a locket inscribed, "To Patrice Love Uncle Phil," green dye, a plastic artificial plant stem, and an address book. This drum, manufactured in 1965 for dye transportation, bore markings indicating it had been shipped to Melrose Plastics, an artificial flower company in Manhattan that was partially owned by Howard B. Elkins, the previous owner of the Jericho property. Elkins divested from Melrose Plastics in 1972 and relocated to Boca Raton, Florida, with his wife. Under infrared light, some pages of the deteriorated address book became legible, revealing a social security number on the first page that belonged to Reina Angelica Marroquin, a 27-year-old immigrant from El Salvador who had worked as a nanny and was employed at the Melrose Plastics factory on East 34th Street. Additionally, a phone number in the book was traced to Kathy Andrade, a friend of Marroquin. Upon being contacted, Andrade disclosed to the police that Marroquin had been involved in an extramarital affair with Elkins, but had grown fearful of him after confiding in his wife, Ruth, about their relationship. Andrade visited Marroquin's apartment in New Jersey, only to discover it vacant, with no sign of Marroquin since her disappearance. A woman resembling Marroquin was later seen with a young child at Melrose Plastics, where employees jested that the child's father was none other than Elkins. When detectives questioned Elkins, he displayed a lack of cooperation. They informed him of their intention to collect his DNA for comparison with that of the fetus discovered within Marroquin. Tragically, the following day, September 10th, 1999, Elkins was found deceased in the rear seat of a neighbor's vehicle, having succumbed to a self-inflicted gunshot wound from a 12-gauge Mossberg 500 shotgun, which he had purchased at Walmart earlier that same day. Subsequent DNA analysis confirmed Elkins as the father of the fetus. Investigators suspect that Elkins either visited Marroquin's apartment or enticed her to the factory, ultimately leading to her demise. He is believed to have transported her body to a residence in Jericho, perhaps intending to dispose of it in the ocean using his boat. However, after filling a barrel with plastic pellets to ensure it would sink, he found it too cumbersome to move and abandoned it in the crawl space. Writer Oscar Corral traveled to San Martin, San Salvador, where Marroquin's 95-year-old mother recounted a dream in which she saw her daughter trapped inside a barrel,